The rain began before the village had fully opened its eyes. It touched the rooftops gently, one quiet drop at a time, slipping down the old red tiles and gathering along the edges of window frames. It was not a storm, not the kind of rain that hurried people indoors or bent the trees in the wind. It was a calm rain, a silver rain, the kind that made the whole world feel softer. At the end of Willow Lane, with a cobblestone street curved around a row of sleepy little houses, there stood a bakery with a pale blue door. Above the door, a wooden sign swung gently in the damp morning air. The sign read, "The Rainy Day Bakery." The letters were painted by hand with tiny golden loaves, warm croissants, cinnamon rolls, and little drops of rain around the edges. The bakery had been there for many years, long enough for the floorboards to remember footsteps, long enough for the walls to smell faintly of butter, sugar, and warm bread, long enough for people in the village to say on rainy days, "I think I'll stop by Mara's." Mara was the baker. She lived above the shop in a small apartment with low ceilings, soft curtains, and a window that looked out over Willow Lane. Every morning before the village was busy, she came downstairs in her wool socks and tied a linen apron around her waist. This morning she moved slowly. Rainy mornings, Mara believed, were not meant to be rushed. They were meant for warm ovens, for tea, for quiet hands, for flour on the table and gentle music from the rain. She lit the little lamps along the counter one by one near the glass jars of plum jam, one near the basket of folded napkins, one near the old brass bell by the door, and one beside the window where the rain made tiny silver lines down the glass. The bakery slowly filled with a soft golden glow. Outside, the sky was gray and calm. Inside, everything was warm. The wooden tables were clean, the chairs were tucked in, the shelves waited patiently for the day's bread. Mara walked into the kitchen and opened the old recipe book that had belonged to her grandmother. The book was thick and worn, with pages softened by years of floury fingers. Some pages had little notes in the corners. Some had ribbons tucked between them. Some had small faded stains from honey, tea, or berry jam. Mara loved those stains. They made the recipes feel alive. Today, the book opened almost by itself to a page titled Cloud Soft Milk Bread. Mara smiled. "That sounds right," she whispered. She took down a cream-colored bowl with tiny blue flowers painted around the rim. Into the bowl she poured warm milk, then a spoonful of sugar, then a sprinkle of yeast, soft and fine like sand. She waited. The bakery was quiet. The rain tapped lightly on the windows. The clock ticked on the wall. And in the bowl, the yeast slowly began to wake. It was a small beginning, almost invisible, but Mara knew that many comforting things began quietly. Bread began with a little warmth. Tea began with a little steam. A peaceful day began with a little patience. When the yeast was ready, Mara added flour, butter, salt, and one small egg with a pale cream shell. She mixed everything gently until the dough came together. Then she turned it onto the wooden table and began to knead. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. The rhythm matched the rain. The rain tapped, the dough softened, the bakery breathed. After a while, the dough became smooth beneath her hands. Mara placed it back into the bowl, covered it with a clean towel, and set it near the warm oven. "Rest now," she whispered. And the dough did, just as the village did, just as the rain did, just as anyone listening might do too. Outside, Willow Lane was still quiet. A few windows glowed. A chimney released a thin ribbon of smoke. Somewhere, a door opened and closed softly. But inside the bakery, time seemed to slow down. Mara washed her hands, dried them on her apron, and began preparing the tea. The kettle warmed on the stove, the cups waited on the counter, and the rain continued to fall gently over the village. A calm rain, a kind rain, a bakery rain. And the day had only just begun. The first customer arrived just as Mara was wiping a little flour from the counter. The brass bell above the door gave a soft ring. Not loud, not sharp, just a gentle sound that seemed to say, "Someone has come in from the rain." It was Mr. Alder, the bookshop owner from across the lane. His gray coat was damp at the shoulders, and his round spectacles were dotted with tiny drops of rain. Under one arm, he carried a stack of books tied with brown string. He held them carefully, as if they were sleeping birds. "Good morning, Mara," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Alder," she replied. "You're early today." He smiled and shook a few raindrops from his hat. "Rain makes the books restless," he said. "I thought I'd come for tea before they began asking difficult questions." Mara laughed quietly. It was the kind of laugh that belonged in bakeries and libraries. Soft, warm, not too loud for the morning. She poured him a cup of chamomile and apple tea from the blue teapot. Steam rose in pale ribbons. The smell was sweet, gentle, and comforting. Then she placed a small plate beside his cup. On it was a slice of yesterday's honey cake, warmed just enough for the edges to become soft again. Mr. Alder took one bite and closed his eyes. "This," he said, "is exactly what rainy mornings are for." Mara smiled and returned to the kitchen. Behind her, Mr. Alder settled into his usual seat near the window. The rain slid down the glass beside him. He opened his book, and the bakery became quiet again. Rain on glass, tea in a cup, pages turning slowly. After a little while, the milk bread dough had risen beautifully. It was round and soft beneath the towel, full of tiny pockets of air. Mara pressed it gently with her fingers, and the dough slowly returned to shape. She divided it into small pieces and rolled each one into a soft round. Then she placed them close together in a deep pan, shoulder to shoulder, as if the little rolls were keeping one another warm. She brushed the tops with milk and melted butter. Then she slid the pan into the oven. Soon the smell of baking bread began to move through the bakery. It drifted under the kitchen door. It curled around the wooden tables. It passed Mr. Alder by the window. He looked up from his book. "Oh," he murmured. Mara heard him from the kitchen and smiled. That little "oh" was one of her favorite sounds. It meant the bakery was doing what it was meant to do. The bell rang again. This time Mrs. Vale stepped inside. She lived up the hill in the yellow house with green shutters and a pear tree in the garden. She carried a basket covered with a red cloth. Her umbrella dripped quietly onto the mat. "Good morning, dear," she said. "I brought pears from my tree, too many for one house." Mara came around the counter and lifted the cloth. Inside were small golden pears with soft brown speckles. They looked gentle and sweet, as if they had ripened slowly in the quiet air. "They're beautiful," Mara said. "They're sleepy pears," Mrs. Vale replied. Mara smiled. "Sleepy pears?" Mrs. Vale nodded. "They ripen slowly. They fall quietly. And they taste best in warm things." Mara looked toward the oven where the milk bread was turning golden. Then she looked back at the pears. A small idea began to form. A soft idea. A rainy day idea. "Would you like tea?" Mara asked. Mrs. Vale smiled. "Only if I may sit near the bookseller and pretend I understand whatever he is reading." Mr. Alder lifted his cup without looking up. "It is a mystery," he said. "But so far the most suspicious character is the weather." Mrs. Vale laughed and took the chair across from him. And just like that, the bakery felt a little fuller. Not busy, not crowded, just gently alive. Mara took the pears into the kitchen. She washed them under cool water and placed them on a towel. One by one she began to peel them. The skins fell in long curling ribbons onto the wooden board. The pear scent was soft and golden, not bright like berries, not sharp like citrus, but mellow, warm, almost sleepy. Outside the rain continued. Inside the bakery glowed, and Mara began making something new. Mara sliced the pears into thin pieces and placed them in a pan with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, and 1 spoonful of honey. As the pan warmed, the butter melted slowly, the sugar softened, the pears released their juice, and the cinnamon bloomed into the air. The kitchen filled with a smell so comforting that Mara stopped for a moment and simply breathed it in. From the front room, Mrs. Vale called softly, "Are those my sleepy pears?" "They are becoming sleepier," Mara answered. "Good," said Mrs. Vale. "That is their destiny." Mara smiled and took out a sheet of pastry. She dusted the table with flour and rolled the pastry gently back and forth, forward, back, forward, back. The rolling pin made a soft sound against the table. The rain answered on the roof. The oven hummed quietly, and for a while all the sounds in the bakery seemed to belong together. Mara cut the pastry into squares. In the center of each square, she placed a spoonful of warm pear filling. Then she folded the corners inward, like wrapping tiny gifts. Before they went into the oven, she brushed each pastry with egg wash and sprinkled a little sugar on top. They looked like golden envelopes waiting to be opened by someone kind. The milk bread came out first. Mara lifted the pan from the oven and set it on the cooling rack. The rolls were pale gold and shining on top. They had baked together, touching at the sides, soft and warm. She pulled one apart carefully. Steam rose from the center. The inside was white and tender, almost like a cloud. Mara placed the warm roll on a plate with a small curl of butter. Then she carried it to Mr. Alder. "For the books," she said. Mr. Alder accepted it with great seriousness. "The books are grateful," he replied. Mrs. Vale leaned across the table. "And what about the neighbors?" Mara laughed and brought another plate. Soon both of them were eating quietly while the rain slid down the window beside them. No one spoke for a few moments. Sometimes comfort does not need conversation. Sometimes it only needs warm bread, soft rain, and a safe place to sit. Near noon, the village became misty. The rooftops blurred. The garden walls shone dark with rain. Little streams ran along the edges of the cobblestones, carrying small leaves and flower petals toward the drains. Mara opened the bakery door for a moment and listened. The air smelled clean and cool. A few people passed under umbrellas. A dog shook water from its coat beneath the post office awning. A bicycle leaned against a wall, its silver bell dotted with rain. Everything felt washed and quiet. Mara closed the door and returned to the warmth. The pear pastries were nearly ready. Their edges had puffed and turned golden. A little syrup bubbled from one corner and caramelized on the tray. When Mara opened the oven, the smell floated through the bakery like a lullaby. Mrs. Vale placed one hand over her heart. "Oh dear," she said softly, "that smells like a memory." Mara looked at her. "A good one?" Mrs. Vale nodded. "A very old kitchen, a rainy window, my mother humming." Mara did not say anything for a moment. She simply placed a warm pear pastry on a plate, dusted it with a whisper of powdered sugar, and set it in front of Mrs. Vale. Then she poured more tea. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, memories rose gently like steam. A little later, the bell rang again. A young mother stepped in, holding the hand of a small child in a yellow raincoat. The child's boots squeaked softly on the wooden floor. His cheeks were pink from the cool air, and his eyes were heavy with sleep. Mara smiled and bent down slightly. "Good morning," she said. The child looked at the glass case, then pointed with one small finger. Mara followed his gaze. Inside the case were little moon-shaped biscuits, lightly dusted with sugar. The mother smiled. He saw them through the window. "Then one must have been waiting for him," Mara said. She placed a moon biscuit in a napkin and gave it to the child. He held it with both hands very seriously, as though it were important work. The young mother ordered tea. The child sat beside her, took one tiny bite of the biscuit, and leaned against her coat. Within minutes, his eyes closed. The moon biscuit remained safely in his hand. The bakery grew quieter for him. Even Mr. Alder turned his pages more slowly. Even the rain seemed to soften. And Mara, moving gently behind the counter, felt that the day had become exactly what a rainy day should be. Warm, slow, kind, and full of small, sleepy things. By early afternoon, the bakery had become the warmest place on Willow Lane. Not only because of the oven, not only because of the tea, but because people came in carrying little pieces of the rainy day with them. And somehow, once inside, those pieces became softer. An old fisherman came next, though the village had no sea, only a narrow river beyond the mill. He had fished that river every morning for 40 years. Today he brought no fish, only a story about a silver trout that had escaped him with great dignity. Mara gave him coffee and a butter roll. He sat near the door, warming his hands around the cup. "The trout," he said, looked at me as if it had somewhere important to be. Mr. Alder nodded from his table. "Respectable." Mrs. Vale smiled. "Then it would have been rude to catch it." The fisherman considered this. "Exactly," he said. The bakery listened to everyone. That was one of its gifts. It listened to quiet people, to tired people, to people who only wanted a pastry and a corner, to people who needed to say something small before going back into the rain. Mara moved between the counter and the kitchen. She sliced bread. She warmed milk. She wrapped loaves in brown paper and tied them with string. She poured tea into cups painted with tiny flowers. Every so often she glanced through the window. Across the street, the bookshop windows were fogged at the edges. Next door, the florist had set buckets of rain-washed tulips beneath the awning. Farther down the lane, smoke curled lazily from chimneys. The village looked like a picture in an old storybook, a place with warm windows, narrow streets, soft roofs, and people who knew the sound of one another's footsteps. In the kitchen, Mara began preparing the evening bake. Rainy days always ended with something special. Not grand, not fancy, just something that made people pause before taking the first bite. Today, she chose cinnamon cream buns. She mixed soft dough with a little cardamom. She rolled it flat, then she spread it with butter, brown sugar, and cinnamon.
The smell alone was enough to make the kitchen feel like a dream. She rolled the dough into a long spiral and sliced it into thick rounds. Each bun showed a swirl inside, like a tiny cinnamon-colored cloud. She placed them in a pan and covered them with a towel. "Take your time," she whispered. And they did. Near the front window, the sleepy child rested against his mother's coat. His moon biscuit was still in his hand. Mrs. Vale lowered her voice. Mr. Alder turned his pages more quietly. Even the brass bell seemed to ring softer when the next customer entered. It was Lena, the florist from next door. She came carrying a small jar of flowers. "Rain bent some of the stems," she said. "They cannot stand in the shop window anymore, but they are still lovely." She placed the jar on the counter. Inside were 3 tulips, 2 sprigs of lavender, and 1 tiny white flower Mara did not know the name of. "They're beautiful," Mara said. "They looked like they belonged here," said Lena. Mara set them beside the lamp near the jam jars. The lavender scent joined the cinnamon, tea, butter, pear, and rain. For a moment, everything in the bakery seemed perfectly arranged, not by design, but by kindness. The afternoon moved slowly. The rain kept falling. People came and went. A teacher bought rolls for supper. A postman warmed his hands by the counter. A girl in a blue scarf asked for 2 pear pastries, one for herself and one for her grandmother. Mara wrapped them carefully. "Tell your grandmother these were made with sleepy pears," she said. The girl smiled. "She will like that." When the door closed behind her, the bakery settled again. The windows glowed gold against the gray street. The little lamps hummed softly. The oven gave off a deep, steady warmth. Mara checked the cinnamon buns under the towel. They had risen beautifully, soft and round, ready for the oven. She slid them in, and soon the sweetest smell of the day began to rise. Cinnamon, butter, brown sugar, warm dough, cardamom. Mr. Alder closed his book. Mrs. Vale looked toward the kitchen. The fisherman lifted his head as if he had heard faraway music. Lena smiled into her tea. Mara pretended not to notice, but she noticed everything. That was another gift of hers. She knew who liked the corner table, who preferred extra milk, who wanted the end slice of a loaf, who came in only when the rain felt too heavy to carry alone. And on rainy days, she made room for all of them. It became finer, lighter, almost like mist. The puddles on Willow Lane trembled with tiny circles. Water slipped from the rooftops in slow, shining drops. The hills beyond the village turned blue and quiet beneath the clouds. Inside the bakery, the cinnamon buns were nearly done. They had risen high and golden in the pan, their swirls dark with melted cinnamon sugar. The glaze waited in a small bowl beside the stove. Cream, sugar, a little vanilla, nothing more. Mara opened the oven door. Warmth rolled out gently. The smell filled the bakery completely. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mrs. Vale whispered, "Oh, Mara." And Mara knew the buns were right. She lifted the pan out and set it carefully on the wooden counter. The buns shone in the lamplight. She brushed them with the thin cream glaze while they were still warm.
The glaze melted into the swirls and settled softly along the edges. Mara placed one bun on a plate for Mrs. Vale, one for Mr. Alder, one for the fisherman, one for Lena, and one, smaller than the rest, for the sleepy child's mother to take home for later. The child was still asleep. His mother smiled gratefully and tucked the wrapped bun into her bag. "For when he wakes," she whispered. The bakery became quiet again as everyone tasted the buns. There are some foods that ask for silence. Warm cinnamon buns on rainy afternoons are one of them. Mr. Alder took a careful bite and leaned back in his chair. "I may need to rewrite my opinion of the weather," he said. Mrs. Vale smiled. "Was it a bad opinion?" "Unfairly suspicious," he said. The fisherman nodded. "Rain brings trout dignity and cinnamon buns. Hard to argue with that." Mara laughed softly and began preparing something for evening. Rain pudding. It was not truly made from rain, of course. It was made with milk, rice, vanilla, and a little cream. But when cooked slowly until it became thick and pale and soft, it looked like clouds reflected in a puddle. Her grandmother had made it only on days when the sky stayed gray from morning until night. Those were the best days for rain pudding, days when the world had already slowed down enough to understand it. Mara took out a heavy pot. Into it went milk, then rice, then vanilla, then a small piece of lemon peel. She stirred with a wooden spoon, slow circles, round and round, round and round. The rain tapped on the windows. The spoon moved through the milk. The bakery settled toward evening. As the pudding cooked, Mara remembered her grandmother's kitchen, the old stove, the blue curtains, the little wooden stool where Mara used to sit with her knees pulled up, waiting for the first spoonful. Her grandmother never hurried rain pudding. Some things, she used to say, only become sweet when they are allowed to become quiet first. Mara had not understood that as a child, but now she did. She understood it in the way bread needed time to rise, in the way tea needed time to steep, in the way people sometimes needed a warm place and no questions, in the way rainy days seem to soften the sharp edges of the world. Outside, the afternoon dimmed. The gray sky turned a deeper blue. The street lamps flickered on one by one, their reflections stretching across the wet stones. The young mother left first, carrying her sleeping child against her shoulder. Mara opened the door for her. Rain whispered under the awning. "Thank you," the mother said softly. Mara smiled. "Come again on the next rainy day." The mother nodded. "I think we will." Next, the fisherman stood and buttoned his coat. He bought 2 rolls wrapped in paper and tucked them carefully inside his jacket. "One for me," he said. "And one for the trout?" asked Mr. Alder. The fisherman smiled. "If the trout apologizes." When he left, the bell rang gently behind him. The bakery grew quieter, more spacious, more evening-like. Mara stirred the pudding until it thickened. Steam curled up from the pot. The smell was soft and creamy, with the smallest brightness from the lemon peel. She spooned a little into a bowl and tasted it. Then she smiled. It was ready. Evening arrived slowly, without anyone noticing the exact moment. The windows turned dark at the edges. The lamps inside the bakery became warmer by comparison, glowing like small suns against the rainy glass. One by one, people began to leave. Lena returned to the flower shop, leaving the jar of bent tulips on Mara's counter. "They belong here tonight," she said. Mara touched one soft lavender sprig. "Then they can keep the bakery company." Mrs. Vale wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and chose a pear pastry for the morning. Mr. Alder bought a small loaf of milk bread. "For tomorrow's breakfast," he said. "Or tonight's midnight snack," said Mrs. Vale. Mr. Alder considered this carefully. "Possibly both." They left together beneath the same umbrella, walking slowly across Willow Lane. Mara watched them through the window until they disappeared into the rainy blue evening. Then she turned the sign on the door. Closed. But the bakery did not feel closed. Not really. It felt as if it had simply exhaled. The kitchen was warm. The shelves were nearly empty. Only a few rolls remained, along with 3 cinnamon buns, half a honey cake, and the pot of rain pudding cooling beside the stove. Mara began the gentle work of closing. She washed the cups, folded the towels, brushed flour from the table, covered the leftover bread, swept the floor in long, slow strokes. The broom made a soft whisper against the wood. Outside, the rain had become a hush. The whole village seemed wrapped in it. When everything was clean, Mara made herself a cup of tea. She spooned rain pudding into a small bowl and added a little pear syrup. Then she took 1 cinnamon bun and sat at the table by the window. The same table where Mr. Alder usually read. The same table where Mrs. Vale had remembered her mother. The same table where the sleepy child had rested against his mother's coat. Mara looked out at Willow Lane. The street lamps glowed in the rain. A cat moved beneath the awning of the flower shop, stepping carefully around puddles. Somewhere in the distance a door closed. Then all was quiet again. Mara took a bite of the cinnamon bun. It was soft and warm. The cinnamon was sweet, but not too sweet. The cardamom lingered gently. She smiled to herself. Then she tasted the rain pudding. It was creamy and calm, with the pear syrup glowing through it like a tiny sunset. For a moment, Mara felt very still. Not lonely, not sad, just peacefully tired, the way one feels after a day well spent. She thought about all the small things that had happened. The first bloom of yeast in warm milk, the sleepy pears in Mrs. Vale's basket, the child with the moon biscuit, the fisherman and his dignified trout, the bent tulips from Lena, the smell of cinnamon filling the room. None of it had been large. None of it would be written in a newspaper. But it mattered. Mara knew that. Small comforts mattered. A warm room mattered. A quiet voice mattered. A slice of bread wrapped carefully for someone's breakfast mattered. The rain continued falling, and Mara sat by the window, letting the bakery hold the day a little longer before letting it go. After a while, she stood and carried her dishes to the sink. She washed them slowly. Then she dried them and placed them back on the shelf. The blue teapot sat upside down on a folded towel. The cups stood in their places. The lamps glowed softly. Before turning off the kitchen light, Mara looked around. The bakery was ready to sleep. The counters were clean. The bread was covered. The tulips leaned gently in their jar. A little cinnamon still lingered in the air. Mara turned off one lamp, then another, then another. The bakery became dimmer and softer with each click. Finally, only the lamp by the window remained. Mara left it glowing, just for a little while. For the rain, for the street, for anyone passing by who might need to see one warm window before going home. Then she took the small lantern from the shelf and climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment above the bakery.